Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have James Fell in Alberta, Canada. James is a health, fitness, and motivation expert. He's also the author of the book, The Holy S Moment, How Lasting Change Can Happen in an Instant. James, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on the show, Angela.
This is such an important topic, and I know that your book talks a lot about having an epiphany. And, you know, it's that sudden moment where you kind of see an answer to a problem that you've been working on and couldn't really make progress. What in your mind causes us to actually have an epiphany moment?
You know, we're not really sure because there's so many different things that can do it. And that's where the title for the book, which I know you gave the cleaned up version, if people actually end up looking for the book, I did spell out the bad word that we're not going to be using today. but they can appear out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. Other ways they can be coaxed, where we work towards making them happen. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do with this book, was try and stack the deck in the reader's favor, where they could do all sorts of things that would increase the likelihood of making it happen. But what it really is it's your unconscious breaking through to the surface, because the human brain is not like a supercomputer where you just feed in a bunch of information and then it processes it, and then in a microsecond it spits out the answer. Our brains are incredibly complex and capable of amazing things, but they're not very well organized, and they kind of, our unconscious minds have a mind of their own, where we spend a lifetime gathering bits of data and information and wisdom and experience, and it floats around in our unconscious where we're not really aware of most of what's going on. But then certain things can trigger a coalescing of this data into something truly profound, where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And there's this massive realization, it's a lot like creativity, where we coming up with an answer to a solution is a very creative process. And it suddenly pops into awareness where we realize, wow, holy S, this is it. And because of that experience, because it's so profound, where maybe we were struggling and suddenly we found the answer to our problem, it's very emotional. It's not a rational step-by-step process. It's an overwhelming, holy cow, I'm so excited kind of thing. And that's what gives what gives such an epiphany its motivational power.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you find that that it takes a certain amount of time for people, or does it vary for different people?
Well, there's the ones where it was unexpected, that it pops in out of nowhere. And then there's other ones. I mean, I was saying this book's only been published 2.5 months ago. And already I've received a number of emails from people, messages saying, this book changed my life when I was on chapter 3. And I was like, wow, that was really quite unexpected. And then there were other ones that they read the book a few times and something hit. So it really is dependent upon where a person is in their life, how closely they follow the advice that I give, and how much they're struggling, how much they past experience they have working on this problem, how far they have to go. It is really a group of guidelines to help the person, find where they're at and get to where they're going. So sometimes it can happen really quickly. A person could be listening to this interview and there could be one little trigger in something that I say or something that you say that makes it happen right now. Or it could be one of those things where it happens later on, or they may decide to buy my book. Please buy my book. And they're reading it, and that triggers something. It's one of those things where it's all about, there's a quote in the book, is that these insights are like cats. They don't always come when called, but they can be coaxed. So we're trying to coax a cat that is something that's very powerful, very wonderful when you experience it, but there's no one true formula, no one perfect blueprint that it doesn't stick to timelines and it's not precise, but if you can make it happen, it can be so overwhelmingly wonderful that it is worth striving for.
I would agree. I mean, I would have to imagine, given how passionate you are about this topic, that maybe you have had at least one epiphany in your life. I mean, how has it changed your life in some way?
Oh, it certainly has. I talk about it in chapter 1, the first big one. There's been other clarifying ones that happen. And that's actually one of the interesting things about the research is that people that have a big life-changing epiphany are more likely to have these clarifying ones that happen later on because they've come to recognize the experience. But my big one happened in my early 20s, and it's kind of a love story. It was about a woman that was so amazing, so ambitious, and I really loved her, and I had this fear that she was just going to leave me in her dust because I was not doing well in life. I was this sort of drunken university dropout that was letting his health go to hell, and I had this sudden change that made me realize that I had the ability to solve all of these problems if I stopped being so lazy, that I'd been a very indolent person up until that point, quite idle. And I realized that if I put some effort into things for the first time in my life, I could, beg my way out of my failing report card and get myself out of debt and get in shape and all these things. And from that moment on, I just realized, yeah, you can fix this. You can do this, and I suddenly became very motivated to work hard. I ended up, yes, I did. I managed to convince my alma mater to let me stay at school. I did get 2 master's degrees. I got in shape, and we got married, and have been together almost 30 years now.
Oh, that's nice. That's great. Well, you mentioned some things that are tied to career, and I know, for many of us, we maybe feel really stuck in our careers, and we wish that we would have an epiphany, and that, we're just out here trying to figure out how in the world to find the answer. I mean, if we are finding ourselves in this sort of spot, what suggestions do you have for us to kind of find the answer?
One of the problems is that people that are stuck have a tendency to be on autopilot, where they're just trying to make it through the day. If they have some type of job that is uninspiring, or they really struggle to make it to each day, they just want to make it to 5 o'clock and then get home and, maybe start self-medicating with a bottle of wine and a Netflix binge or something like that. That it's important that you're probably familiar with Aesop's fable about the tortoise and the hare. And what an epiphany is it's turning that on its head, where we say that it's not slow and steady that wins the race. It is actually the motivated hare that dashes ahead, invigorated, undeterred, unstoppable. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't some merit to the approach of baby steps, of being a tortoise. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things about having increasing the likelihood of having this life-changing insight that transforms you and delivers to you this answer that you've been seeking is you have to do some of that uninspired work. Sometimes you probably have to do some of this uninspired work of trying to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? Taking an actual keen interest of, okay, what is it that I could accomplish with my life if I was suddenly inspired to strive for it? If motivation was no longer a scarce resource, if you had all the motivation you would ever need, realistically speaking, what could you do? What could you accomplish? And that is not a question that's easy to answer. This is something that requires some digging and some homework and some research and some pondering, where you can just spend time thinking about, what do I want to be when I grow up? Where do I go from here? And using that bit of information day after day, where you're behaving like a tortoise and gathering this information. However, you're behaving like a tortoise, yet you are thinking like a hare. Because what may happen is suddenly that answer is going to come to you during one of those distraction method exercises that I talk about in the book. And all of a sudden, you are no longer in tortoise mode. You are ready to charge ahead and do this. Because when the answer arrives, you're not like, okay, yeah, maybe I'll do it. It's like, oh, wow, yeah, I have to do this. But one of the things I want to talk about is that you gather this information. That's the analytical phase of trying to trigger an epiphany. But that's not when the answer comes. The answer to the problem arrives while you're not actively trying to solve the problem. And this is one of the things that a lot of people don't do is we live in an age of constant distraction. We're always looking at a smartphone or surfing the net, watching TV, listening to an audiobook or a podcast, no offense. and what we need to do is we need to reacquaint ourselves with being comfortable with our own thoughts. It has been scientifically proven that the most likely scenario for having this type of sudden insight is when you're in a positive mood state where you are not distracted by anything else but just being alone with your thoughts. So for example, going for a walk in nature where you're not looking at your phone, you're not, listening to an audiobook, but you're just sort of taking in the rustle of the leaves and the blowing of the wind and the chirping of the birds. And that is what allows these ideas to get turned over in your head and coalesce and deliver that answer to you. Another really good one actually is, you've probably heard of before, shower thoughts. So many people have great ideas in the shower, and that is one of the ways that it can happen. Meditation, prayer is a big one. You don't even need to be religious for prayer to work. It's just going to be another form of meditation where that's when these answers will come to you.
That makes a lot of sense. I think those are all really helpful suggestions. It's interesting that when we think about sort of trying to figure out what we want to do, we talk sometimes about things like long-term change. And you actually mentioned that maybe long-term change and goals, that they might not actually be the answer. And so often we talk about forming good habits and that those are the things that are going to lead us in the direction that we want to go. But if goal setting and habit formation is not the answer, I mean, what's the alternative that we should be considering?
The problem with, and I'm not anti habit formation, but I definitely am sort of anti the concept of willpower and grit, because it's been shown to largely be a myth. The idea is that the problem with willpower is that it's based on a model of suffering where, okay, willpower means you are exerting this will in order to do something that you would rather not. This is why they preach slow and steady, these baby steps, because they only want you to be a little bit uncomfortable, do that minimal amount of suffering that you can tolerate day after day after day until you gradually develop these habits that become sticky. Well, okay, this is what we know. This is what we know, that it can work if you're really determined to make it work. It also has a shockingly high failure rate. Human beings don't really operate that way. We have extraordinary difficulty sticking to things that we don't want to do. So the model of the life-changing epiphany is rapidly uncovering a massive shift in your identity and your values of who you are, because we do what we want. We do what we were driven to because we're inspired and we're passionate and we feel that we must do it. It would be uncomfortable to not do it. It's something that we want so badly. So instead of trying to struggle through with grit and willpower to develop habits that you don't want to, it's all about uncovering that hidden passion that you may not even know existed. There's a story in the introduction of the book of a woman who had never been active her entire life. She worked as a librarian. She drank a bottle of wine a day. She would eat an entire pizza by herself at lunch. She smoked, and she was miserable. And she didn't really have any kind of driving passion in her life. And then one day she decided to try fencing, because, she was an intellectual type of woman. And it was the one sport that she thought maybe she could develop an interest in because it's quite an intellectually engaging sport. It's a very complex sport. And after a short period of struggle, she suddenly had this awakening realization in class that this is who she was and who she was meant to be. And from that moment on, she was 100% driven that she would become the best fencer she possibly could. And 10 years later, she won a silver medal at the North American level because she was so driven. She quit smoking, she quit drinking, she lost a bunch of weight. She got it enhanced her whole life, her relationships, her career, because it was an uncovered passion. So that's what I'm trying to get people to understand, is that it's about unleashing this passion that you may have some inkling of, or you may not. We don't necessarily know what it's going to be. I didn't know that I was really driven to become a writer until, I started playing around with it and said, wow, I love doing this. This is what I want to be my new career.
That makes sense. So in your book, you also have a chapter called Dreamers Aren't Doers. And that actually really stuck out to me. It's Dreamers Aren't Doers, making positive fantasies work for you instead of against you. And it really reminded me of a lot of people that I know who talk about the big things that they plan to do, and then they never even take a step to try to do those things. If we are finding ourselves, daydreaming about getting a new job, but we're not able to move forward, like, from your perspective, what do you think we can do to turn our fantasy into a reality?
Well, I think the first part is to explain why this type of positive fantasizing about goal achievement is detrimental, so that people can learn to recognize when they're doing it so that they don't do it. And why it does it is because it creates a false sense of accomplishment. So the example that I use when I speak about it, and I also use this example in the book, is with me playing guitar, which I can't. I always wanted to be able to play guitar really well, but I didn't really have any innate talent, and I didn't have the drive to kind of overcome said lack of talent. But when I'm listening to a rock song in my car or on my iPod while I'm out for a run, and I hear that great guitar solo, I imagine that it's me playing in my head. I'm an amazing guitar player, playing to crowds of people, adoring fans. And what happens is you get this sense of accomplishment in your head, that you get that positive feeling of you've already kind of achieved it, which demotivates you to actually do the work to achieve it. So it's the whole concept of, got to think positive, keep your eye on the prize, is actually detrimental to achievement. That being said, that doesn't mean you throw it out completely. It's okay to have it a bit where you think of, okay, this is a goal that I want to achieve. It's going to feel great when I do it, but the lion's share of your mental effort needs to focus on overcoming obstacles. So instead of fantasizing about, let's stick with the example of me learning to play guitar. Instead of fantasizing about being this great guitar player, you would instead look at, okay, where are the holes in my schedule where I would do this? Imagine who you're going to take lessons from, what kind of guitar you're going to buy, when you're going to find time to do it. The training to do scales and getting a little bit better each day. And then maybe, performing for some friends or something like that. It's that cliched focusing on the journey, not the destination stuff. Because when you can create a positive fantasy where you can have the attitude of, these are the obstacles that stand in my way that I must overcome, and you have a positive attitude about, I can overcome these obstacles, all of a sudden motivation goes through the roof. Because when you realize you can overcome those obstacles, you feel like you want to. And that positive reinforcement loop gets set in motion, where with one obstacle being overcome, suddenly you want to overcome the next one and the next one and the next one. And before you realize it, you've gone a long way toward achieving that goal. And it's no longer really about achieving the goal. It's because I've found that when you achieve that big goal, suddenly it's like, it's almost anticlimactic in a way. And then you're thinking about, okay, well, what's the next big thing that I can do? What's my next mission?
I think you're right. And I think you're right about that feeling. It's like when I see people who talk about what their goals are and they're so excited about the fact that they are going to eventually make a certain amount of money or they are going to have this big job and then they never take a step toward it. I think you're right. It's like they sort of get the positive feeling that they wanted and then maybe they just give up.
Yeah, the people that are really the high achievers aren't ones that are constantly talking about how great life is going to be when they achieve this goal. They're more talking about what's happening this week and what this is what I'm doing this week to achieve this goal. And they don't even talk to, they're so focused on the here and now in making this happen. And then, well, whatever happens this week is going to affect what happens the week after that. They've got the plans get fuzzier the further out you get because you're never really sure what you're going to be facing in the immediate term. And they're focused on getting things done. Yeah, they may have this big picture fuzzy goal, but they're my writing career has not necessarily evolved the way I thought it was going to 10 years ago because nobody is that great of a prognosticator. So you adapt and you overcome.
It makes a lot of sense. Well, as we talk about, meeting goals, I know, you often also work with people who, you're helping them with their health and you're helping them with their overall fitness. And I believe there are a lot of times parallels, that you can see in people, whether it's health goals or it's professional goals. When you think about that, what are some of the things that you find that make someone like an individual, what would make us more likely to achieve our goals?
Having a real sense of alignment with your core identity and your values. So there's an example of someone in the book that now this is not a career example. It is a weight loss example, but I do like telling it because sustained weight loss is one of those things that is really hard to do. And this was a man who weighed over 400 pounds and he had obesity his entire life. And what happened was that he had tried and failed to lose weight many times. This was a goal that he had, but he was never able to stick to a diet or to exercise regularly because these were not things that he liked doing. And then one day his wife came out of the bathroom with a very unexpected positive pregnancy test. And at first he was filled with overwhelming joy that he was going to be a father. This was something that he was extremely excited about. But then in that moment, he realized that this time he was going to lose weight and he was going to keep it off. And the reason why he knew that, it was because he'd gone through a fundamental shift in his identity. He had gone from not being a father to, well, congratulations, you're about to be a dad. And that was a shift in his identity as well as a shift in his values, because one of the things that he greatly valued was this idea of being this healthy, fit dad that could be this great role model for his kids and be, really energized to play with them. And he liked this idea of being this fit dad. And he told me, and I quote, "I didn't have to struggle with my motivation. It came built in." And it was like that old identity of the man with obesity ceased to exist. And this new fit dad just took his place. And from that moment on, he was never struggled to be motivated again. He lost over 200 pounds and he's kept it off more than 11 years now.
Wow, that's incredible. That is incredible. I actually have a friend here in Memphis who in the last 2 years, his original weight was around 560 pounds and he's down to about 300 pounds and he's still going. And I guess, he's very tall. He's 6'5", but I guess for years and years, it had been really hard to even begin to tackle this issue. But I have seen, as he has lost all of this weight, a huge transformation in identity. And I think, I'm not exactly sure what the catalyst was, but it's very clear that has happened, that has happened together.
Let me guess. He doesn't treat it as suffering. I would guess that this is something that he is enthusiastic about.
Oh, he's very excited. He's actually he's a digital marketer, and so he's been documenting his journey online. And I think for him, especially on Instagram, and I think for him, first of all, it's become a lifestyle. It's this is what he's going to do every single day, no matter what. But I think sharing his journey and being honest about it with his friends and with sort of the public in general has provided a lot of positive reinforcement from people. And that was something I think that's really helped him through the journey. So it's been really interesting.
Yeah, there was a unlocking of some type of hidden passion where he realized that this was something that he wanted to do. It's that whole sort of adage of, you really got to want it. You've got to, it's when you uncover this type of mission, this vision that has to be fulfilled, you become tireless in its pursuit month after month, year after year. It's one of those things that, for your career, like there has been times when I've gotten up really early or stayed up really late, hammering away at the keyboard because I was inspired about something that I was writing, because I was so excited about my work that it's one of those things that can keep you awake when you should sleep. And it's not what I would call, the epiphany is not a quick and easy fix. It can be a quick transformation, but it can make you almost obsessive about your work because it has come to define you as truly important, where you just, it's so hard to even hold back because you become so incredibly driven and motivated.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking a lot about work, and it does seem that sometimes when we're having a hard time with work or with our career, we also have a hard time taking care of ourselves. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how does our physical health tie into sort of our mental health and performance?
Well, one of the examples that I have seen is, yes, I know there are issues when you're working really hard at a project that it can become all encompassing, that you can have a tendency to not eat healthy and not exercise because you've just got to stay at this computer or do this work, whatever it is. And that can be a bit of a problem. And I'm not sure that I really have a good answer to that, because sometimes when someone is driven to write a symphony or write a book or whatever, that it can be hard to pull themselves away. What I can say on the front end is that for people who are seeking some type of life-changing moment to transform themselves, that getting physically active can be one of those things that can help trigger it, and that a healthy body really can equate to a healthy mind, as well as help give them that energy to follow through on this mission in life. So although my background has been in health and fitness and I've expanded beyond that, I'm still a big fan. I still really encourage physical activity is something that I think is great for everyone. And it doesn't need to be CrossFit or something really intense, or, hitting heavy duty weightlifting or anything. Just regular walking can be very beneficial. And walking is the most popular form of physical activity on the planet, and it's really good for you. That if the only thing that listeners come away from today is they start walking for 30 minutes a day at a reasonably brisk pace, they're going to be well ahead.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good suggestion. 'Cause I do think oftentimes when we think of physical health, we're thinking of something like you said, like CrossFit, something really intimidating. And sometimes it's just doing something that you enjoy and getting moving.
You've probably heard it's been misattributed to John Steinbeck. It was actually much more modern than that, but it's the concept of the temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Have you heard that quote before?
Tell me about it.
So it's a quote that said, socialism never took root in the United States because most Americans see themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And to unpack it a little bit, it just means that they want the brutal capitalist type of scenario because they think that they're going to follow through on that American dream. And even if they're very poor, they're just this temporarily embarrassed millionaire that one day they will be millionaires. I wrote an article, even though it's quite unlikely, I wrote an article about how many people are temporarily embarrassed fitness models, where they want to believe that we've been so inundated in the media with these heavily photoshopped images of dehydrated fitness models that have tans and great lighting and all that, that we're sold on this concept that everybody can and should look like this, that we develop extreme all or none concepts about health and fitness. Whereas, if you just threw out that concept and thought, actually, you know what? Just with some basic physical activity and a little bit better eating, I could be a lot healthier, feel a lot better, be a lot happier. No, I'm not going to look like the person on that magazine, but neither do 99.99% of the rest of the population. So who cares? Let's be more realistic about our health and do something that feels good and that is manageable.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, even the person on the magazine doesn't look like the person on the magazine.
Not most of the time. They prep for those photo shoots well in advance.
And there's certainly a lot of Photoshop involved as well.
Yep.
So I saw an interview where you mentioned a saying that a lot of people like to tiptoe through life, making it safely to death. And that really struck me. What do you mean by that? A lot of people like to tiptoe through life, making it safely to death.
Well, there's a concept that a lot of people never really achieve their full potential. I think it was William James, the father of American psychology in the late 19th century, said that most people's only use a small fraction of their potential. And a lot of us are afraid of taking risks where if we were a little more courageous, a little more inspired, we could do amazing things. And that sometimes that involves things like, okay, we have to change our financial goals and budget more carefully, and maybe not buy that latest iPhone because we're taking a career risk. I mean, for me, 10 years ago, I took a very significant career risk in leaving a marketing executive position that paid very well in order to become a writer, which is not a career that's known for financial viability. But it was something that was very important to me in terms of, my mental well-being. It was, instead of a transactional job that I wasn't terribly inspired about, didn't like very much, I had to do a job that I love and have had the last decade of my life has just been outstanding because of this wonderful career that I pursued that financially has gotten better and better over the years. There's certain trade-offs that I've had to make. So you can do this approach of, I'm just going to play it safe and stick in this job because it pays the bills and tiptoe my way safely to death. But the thing is, you could make it unsafely to death. You could have life be more of a thrill ride where you didn't sit on your deathbed with a bunch of regrets of things that you didn't try. There are adventures that you can go on and still manage the risk. I'm not saying be foolish, but maybe consider the possibility of trying things that make life more exciting and more worth living.
Oh, I'm with you. On that. I do think a lot of people avoid risk and they end up in really unhappy situations for a very long time. So I think that's excellent advice. Well, James, where can we go to learn more about you and your work, and where can we find your book?
So the best place to find me and my book is at my website, bodyforwife.com. So that's BODYFORWIFE.com. There is a tab there for books where they can check out my books. If they'd like to hire me as a speaker, there's a tab for speaking. I have a blog that has quite a bit of profanity on it, if people are okay with that. And as well as I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/bodyforwife. Twitter is the same /bodyforwife.
Excellent. Well, James, thank you for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you, Angela. It was a real pleasure.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.